Chairman.
I call the Honourable Member Megan Woods.
Mr Chairman, and I'm happy to take a call on part 3 of this bill to talk about how it is that we're going to manage many of the pests that pose a significant threat to New Zealand's biosecurity. This is quite a different threat to our biosecurity than we've been discussing under the previous part of this Act, when we were talking about microorganisms that can affect our terrestrial our marine biosecurity. This is very much about safeguarding our terrestrial environments. This is very much about protecting our high country. This is very much about dealing with many of the legacy issues we have from 19th century colonisation and many of the non-Indigenous species that we now have in our country, and what the impact of the presence of these species are on our environment. And that is why we're having to go through some very specific changes to the Act in terms of managing wild animals. And my colleagues Damien O'Connor and Moana Maki have very ably articulated many of the issues that we have with this part of the bill, so I think I'll just be taking a very short call on this part of the bill. That we have two very significant questions that we would like the Minister to answer in this committee stage of this legislation. How it is that we do balance this view of the resource versus the pest nature of some of these species that we now have in our high country and in other parts of New Zealand. I don't think there's many New Zealanders that haven't observed some of the damage to our environments that have been caused by some of these species. I don't think there's many New Zealanders, be they young or old, who doesn't recognise the damage that a possum can do and what a significant threat to our native forests that these creatures play. So some very important questions are there. We also need some assurances about how it is that this piece of legislation fits with yet another piece of legislation that is currently going through this House. We've posed questions in terms of how it gels with the EEZ legislation, but how it is that it's going to fit with the Game Animal Council bill that's currently before Select Committee and submissions are being heard on. And Moana Maki asked some very pertinent questions there. Because what we have is we have to grapple with some very interesting questions about how, under the current systems, under the current legislation we have, pests are not always managed in the best way. And the regulatory impact statement for this bill sets this out very clearly, that we have some pest management that's not happening where it should be, thus putting at risk more of our environment and many of our flora and fauna species that are put at risk by the fact that we are not managing significant pest incursions in these areas. And then we have some pest management that is happening when it's not needed. So that we on one hand have whole gaps, then we do have other areas where we actually have pest management that is happening when it's not necessarily needed. And this is all about finding this balance. And my colleague Damien O'Connor touched very, very pertinently on an issue there about the need to get this balance in relation to some of our commercial hunting enterprises that we have. How is it that we do protect these very precious environments but not completely kill off this industry and manage the tar in these areas in the high country? And importantly, in what this bill is doing overall, and we're seeing it in every part of this legislation, that some pest management is not as effective as it could be. And this bill again is about making it available to us, the new technologies and the changes that have happened in the world since 1993. Now, when we look at the age of some of the legislation that comes before this House, a bill that was passed in 1993 doesn't seem particularly old. But in this area of biosecurity, this actually is a very aged piece of legislation, because this is a very fast-moving area where we do have a lot of technological advance, and one that we must have the ability for the Department of Conservation, for everyone who is involved in biosecurity in this country, to be able to use the best technology that is available to them. And what we are also seeing is some of the species very clearly defined under here of what it is that is posing, what these wild animals that are going to pose a threat to our environment are. Thank you.
Michael Woodhouse.
I move that the question be now put.
I'll hear,